Privilege, in fact, to have you on Republic this evening.
Well, the privilege is mine, so thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. All of your timing of your appearance on Republic couldn't have been better, because we've heard that Trump has approved a bill to punish those who buy uranium or petroleum products from Russia. And that, according to this bill, of which I've seen a draft, at least 500% tariffs should be imposed on these countries. This is going into the unreal sphere. First question, is he likely to do something as drastic in your view?
With Trump, things are out of control. He's invading countries. He's threatening countries. He left more than 50 treaties and UN organizations today. He's a psychologically unstable person in a political system that has broken down in the United States, so we don't have constitutional control. Tomorrow, it is said that the Supreme Court might rule on the legality of Trump's overall tariff system. If the court is honest, which is a big assumption, of course, in the U.S. these days, but if the court turns out to be honest, it will strike down all of what has happened up until now, because Trump has grossly abused his power. This is unconstitutional, what he has been doing. It is illegal, but he's gotten away with it because we are not in a constitutional order in the United States right now. We are in some combination of rule by the security apparatus and a very intemperate president.
Russian tanker, we were talking about this as, potentially a major escalation and flirting with an act of war of seizing, a Russian flagship.
Right. Yeah. No, I find that very worrying. Actually, this whole war on the tankers, I think, is actually very dangerous. It's more dangerous than anything that we see happening in Ukraine. Because it, as I said earlier, it does strike at core economic interests of Russia and of China too. China has been affected by this, and I think this is something that they just have to respond to. But it's hard, But it's a dangerous situation. It's actually like the Americans have launched a war on the seas. And they're just hoping that it'll go away because they do not want to be engaged in a world war, but they're going to have to respond in some sort of significant way, and I'm sure that they're thinking about it. Now, in the case of this Russian tanker, it was a Russian flag tanker. The Americans denied it. Like Vance said, "Oh no, it was not really Russian. It was just phony Russian," right? But the Russians themselves said that this tanker re-registered, to be so that it was flying under the Russian flag. It was. The procedure had been performed properly, and so this was just a fact. It was now a Russian flag tanker, and the Russians notified the Americans of this fact on more than one occasion. This tanker was out at sea for, I think, at least 2 weeks, and so the Americans knew it. They knew it, and yet they seized it. Now you get this. There's some confusion about really what happened and what the Americans were doing, what their motivation was, because you get at least most of the the U.S. administration saying, this first of all, that there were no Russian naval vessels in the vicinity. And then this really had nothing to do with the Russians. You especially get that from Vance. Now, one exception is actually Trump himself, who said, they saw us coming, and those Russian, that the Russian Navy fled. And now, so anyway, he wasn't, he wasn't singing from the same hymn book here, let's just put it, but it's typical of Trump. He said something off the cuff. And now was his statement there actually reflecting real intelligence that he had received, or is it just something that he watched on TV? So there's this whole question, really, were there Russian naval vessels in the vicinity? We don't know for sure. One thing is that we can't know. There hasn't been any sort of visual confirmation. There aren't any journalists out there. We just had some Western news sources like Reuters, for example, that reported that there was a submarine in the vicinity, and some of them, spoke of other naval vessels. There are different stories. Some said that they were there, actually, had arrived and were to protect the tanker. Others said that they were arriving, but were just on the horizon when the Americans seized the tanker. They weren't close enough. We hear different stories. Now, is any of this true? It may very well be true, but we don't know. As we said earlier, Western intelligence agencies will leak information that they see as, to their benefit. Sometimes that information is true, but sometimes it's false. We just don't have any confirmation from the Russians or from the U.S. administration. We had that one statement from Trump, but who knows where Trump got that? Maybe he got it from the same news. That's so we don't know. But
on January, a Russian Navy destroyer escorted 2 cargo vessels as they traveled close to the Portuguese coastline, drawing the attention of European maritime observers. Reports indicate that the convoy comprised 2 sanctioned Russian vessels, MYS Zelenia and Sparta 4, both previously monitored for their suspicious routes through international waters. Official maritime declarations list Port Said in Egypt as the final destination for these ships. However, multiple intelligence sources have reported that Sparta 4 often files Egypt as its destination, but ultimately continues to a Russian naval port in Syria. Meanwhile, movement patterns and course changes of MYS Zelenia point toward a possible docking in Libyan waters, suggesting a separate mission objective. Route analysis published by United 24 Media indicated that Russia might be deliberately concealing the true purpose and endpoint of this convoy. Both vessels are known to have a history of filing misleading or incomplete route information, particularly while supporting Russian overseas military operations or logistics missions. Defense experts noted that the participation of the Severomorsk destroyer suggests the cargo being transported is of a sensitive or strategic nature. The Severomorsk, a Udaloy-class destroyer of Russia's Northern Fleet, rarely operates as an escort for civilian cargo vessels. These cargo ships are owned or managed by companies that are currently under Western sanctions for their involvement in Russian military or energy logistics. Sparta 4 is managed by SC South LLC, a company reported to hold several active contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense. The same believed to function as a component within Russia's broader military-industrial supply network, facilitating shipments to the defense sector. MYS Zelenia has ties to sanctioned companies Transtroy LLC and Eco Shipping LLC, both known for handling restricted transport operations. These logistics entities provide transportation and shipping support for the Arctic LNG-2 energy project, operated by Russian energy corporation Novatek. The naval escort follows a tense week during which U.S. forces captured 2 vessels linked to Russia in international waters. On January 7th, American naval units seized the Russian-flagged oil tanker Marinera while it was sailing across the Atlantic Ocean. The Marinera was reportedly accompanied by a Russian submarine and support ships, raising concerns about covert coordination at sea. Just 2 days later, on January 9th, U.S. forces intercepted another vessel named Olena, suspected of transporting Russian oil in violation of trade restrictions. In response, Russia issued warnings of possible retaliation and launched an Orshnik missile, a weapon capable of carrying a nuclear payload, during a strike on Ukraine.